November 19th, 1963, Ari Crown Theater, Chicago. 12,000 people watching Louis Armstrong perform. The stage lights were blazing bright, trumpet notes were slicing through the air like silver arrows. Applause was crashing against the walls and echoing through every corner of that magnificent theater. Louis was magnificent that night, his smile as wide as ever, his voice as warm as summer rain, his energy filling every inch of that vast space. But right in the middle of "When You're Smiling," a woman's voice rose from the center of the auditorium. It was so desperate, so raw with pain, that Louis pulled the trumpet away from his lips and the music suddenly stopped. "Please, Mr. Armstrong," she was screaming through tears. "My daughter is dying. She just wanted to see you." 12,000 people held their breath. The entire theater went silent in a way that felt almost sacred. Louis walked to the edge of the stage, squinting into the audience under those hot spotlights. There, in the fourth row, sat a small girl with her mother, bald head covered by a pink scarf, thin body wrapped in a coat too big for her frame, but in her eyes there was infinite love for the man on that stage. That night, Louis Armstrong did something that no one in that theater could ever forget, and this story remained hidden for nearly 60 years. Before we continue, if stories like this move you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the untold moments that changed music history forever. But the real story didn't begin on November 19th. The real story began 3 weeks earlier, on October 28th, 1963, in a small hospital room on Chicago's South Side. Louis Armstrong was exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the bone-deep weariness that comes from carrying the world on your shoulders for 40 years. He sat in his hotel suite at the Sherman House, staring at a bottle of pills his doctor had prescribed for his heart. The label read, "Take twice daily. Reduce physical exertion. Avoid stress." Louis laughed bitterly at that last instruction. Avoid stress. How could he avoid stress when every breath he took was a reminder that his body was betraying him? The year 1963 had not been kind to Louis Armstrong. His heart condition had worsened significantly since summer. During a performance in Las Vegas in August, he had experienced chest pain so severe that he nearly collapsed on stage. Only his iron will and decades of professionalism had kept him standing until the final note. Backstage, his wife, Lucille, had found him sitting on the floor, gasping for air, clutching his chest. The doctor who examined him that night had been blunt. "Mr. Armstrong, if you don't slow down, you'll be dead within 6 months." But Louis couldn't slow down. He had tours booked through the end of the year, contracts signed, people depending on him, bands to pay, musicians who fed their families from the money they earned, playing behind Satchmo. How could he tell them all to stop? How could he disappoint the thousands of fans who bought tickets months in advance just to see him perform? More than that, Louis Armstrong didn't know how to exist without music. The trumpet was his voice, his soul, his reason for breathing. Without it, who was he? Just an old man from New Orleans who'd gotten lucky? No. He was Satchmo. He was Ambassador Satch. He was the man who'd changed jazz forever, who'd brought American music to every corner of the globe, who'd made presidents and kings smile. He couldn't stop. Not yet. Not ever. But his body was telling a different story. The morning of October 28th, Louis had woken up feeling weak. His hands trembled when he tried to hold his coffee cup. His vision blurred when he stood up too quickly. Lucille had begged him to cancel the Chicago show scheduled for mid-November. "Baby, your health is more important than any concert," she'd said, her voice breaking. Louis had kissed her forehead and promised he'd be careful, but they both knew he was lying. That same morning, in a children's hospital ward across town, 9-year-old Emily Carter was having the worst day of her short life. Emily had been fighting leukemia for 2 years. 2 years of chemotherapy that made her vomit until there was nothing left inside. 2 years of hospital beds and needles and doctors with sad eyes who tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. 2 years of watching her mother cry when she thought Emily wasn't looking. 2 years of feeling her body grow weaker while her spirit tried desperately to stay strong. Her parents, Margaret and James Carter, had done everything humanly possible. They'd sold their house to pay for experimental treatments. They'd driven Emily to hospitals in 4 different states, seeking second opinions, third opinions, fourth opinions. They'd prayed in churches, synagogues, and temples. They'd begged God, the universe, anyone who might be listening for a miracle. But by October 1963, the doctors had delivered the verdict no parent should ever hear. There's nothing more we can do. We're so sorry. Make her comfortable. Make these last weeks count. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. Emily's one request, her only wish, was heartbreakingly simple. Mama, I want to see Louis Armstrong sing, just once before I go to heaven. Emily had discovered Louis Armstrong's music 2 years earlier, during her first long hospital stay. A nurse had brought in a small radio and tuned it to a jazz station. When, what a wonderful world came through those tinny speakers. Something magical happened. Emily, who had been crying from pain and fear, stopped crying. She listened, really listened. And when Louis's gravelly voice sang about skies of blue and clouds of white, about the bright blessed day and the dark sacred night, Emily smiled. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. From that moment on, Louis Armstrong became Emily's lifeline. His music was the only thing that calmed her during the worst moments. When the chemotherapy made her so sick she couldn't eat, she listened to "Hello, Dolly." When the pain was so intense she couldn't sleep, "When You're Smiling" played softly beside her hospital bed. When she was afraid of dying, "What a Wonderful World" reminded her that life, however brief, was still beautiful. Margaret Carter tried everything to make Emily's wish come true. She called every radio station in Chicago, begging them to help her get in touch with Louis Armstrong's management. She wrote letters to concert venues, to recording studios, to anyone who might know how to reach him. Most never responded. A few sent form letters expressing sympathy, but offering no real help. Then, on November 10th, 9 days before the concert, a miracle happened. A family friend who worked as a janitor at the Erie Crown Theater overheard two stagehands discussing Louis Armstrong's upcoming performance on November 19th. He immediately called Margaret. Tickets were nearly sold out, but Margaret didn't care about the cost anymore. Money meant nothing when your child had weeks to live. She called the box office and used the last of their savings to buy 2 tickets in the 4th row center section. When Margaret told Emily they were going to see Louis Armstrong perform live, the little girl's reaction was something Margaret would remember for the rest of her life. Emily, who could barely sit up in bed, who had stopped eating solid food days earlier, who cried from pain every night, suddenly became radiant. Her eyes lit up with a joy that seemed almost impossible given her condition. "Really, Mama? Really? We're going to see Mr. Armstrong?" Margaret nodded through tears. "Really, baby, November 19th, just you and me and Louis." Have you ever had someone's music touch your life so deeply that it became your lifeline? Share your story in the comments below. The day started terribly. Emily woke up with a fever of 103 degrees. She was too weak to walk. Her pain medication wasn't working anymore. Dr. Phillips, her oncologist, strongly advised against taking her to the concert. "Mrs. Carter, Emily's immune system is virtually non-existent. A crowded theater could expose her to infections she can't fight, and the exertion alone might be too much for her heart." But Emily had heard every word. From her hospital bed, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Mama, please. I don't care what happens after tonight. I just want to see him once. Just once." Margaret looked at her daughter's face. At 9 years old, Emily looked like she was 6. The disease had stolen her hair, her weight, her childhood. But it hadn't stolen her spirit. In Emily's eyes, Margaret saw determination, hope, and a kind of peace that came from knowing exactly what she wanted from her remaining time on Earth. Margaret made the decision right then. "We're going," she told Dr. Phillips. "If tonight is all we have, then tonight will be beautiful." James Carter carried Emily to their car, wrapped in blankets despite the mild November weather. Margaret had packed Emily's medication, her pain pills, water bottles, and a bucket in case she got sick. They arrived at the Erie Crown Theater 2 hours early, just to make sure Emily wouldn't have to fight through crowds. An usher, seeing Emily's condition, quietly arranged for them to enter through a side door and escorted them directly to their seats. Emily sat in that fourth-row seat, bundled in her coat and pink scarf, and waited. She was in pain. She was nauseated. She was burning with fever, but her eyes were fixed on that empty stage with an intensity that seemed to transcend her physical suffering. "He's really going to be right there," she whispered to her mother. "Mr. Armstrong is going to be right there where I can see him." At 7:30, the lights dimmed, the crowd roared, and Louis Armstrong walked onto that stage. For Emily, the world disappeared. There was no pain anymore, no sickness, no hospital beds or needles or doctors with sad eyes. There was only Louis. His white handkerchief gleaming in the stage lights, his trumpet raised high, his smile, that famous Satchmo smile, spreading across his face like sunrise. When he began playing "When It's Sleepy Time Down South," Emily started crying. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming joy. She was here. She had made it. She was watching her hero, her inspiration, her reason for holding on, performing live right in front of her. Louis performed 4 songs. "When It's Sleepy Time Down South," Mac the Knife, "Blueberry Hill," "Hello, Dolly." Each one was perfect. Each one was a gift. But when Louis began the 5th song, "When You're Smiling," something inside Margaret Carter broke. This was Emily's favorite song, the one she'd requested played at her funeral, the one that had sustained her through 2 years of hell. And watching Louis perform it live, knowing her daughter had only days left, Margaret couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't plan what happened next. She didn't think about the 12,000 people around her. She didn't consider that interrupting a concert was inappropriate, possibly even forbidden. She only thought about her daughter, about the unfairness of a 9-year-old dying, about the fact that they'd come so far and survived so much, and Louis Armstrong was right there, just 50 feet away, and he needed to know. He needed to know what his music had meant to one little girl. Margaret stood up, and she screamed, "Mr. Armstrong, please! My daughter is dying. She loves you so much." The music stopped. 12,000 people turned to look. Louis Armstrong lowered his trumpet and walked to the edge of the stage, his hand shading his eyes against the spotlights. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying through the now silent theater. "What did you say?" Margaret's voice broke as she spoke. "This is my daughter, Emily. She's 9 years old. She has leukemia. The doctors say she has days left, maybe weeks. All she wanted, her only wish, was to see you perform. Your music has been the only thing that's helped her through this nightmare. Please, she just wanted you to know how much you mean to her." Louis stood very still. The spotlight caught the tears forming in his eyes. For a long moment, nobody in that theater moved, nobody breathed. Then Louis did something unprecedented in his 40-year career. He turned to his band and said simply, "We're taking a break, boys." He walked off stage, leaving 12,000 people in stunned silence. Backstage, Louis was already giving orders to his road manager, Joe Glazer. "Get that family backstage right now. And I mean right now, Joe." Joe started to protest about schedule, about protocol, about the thousands of people waiting. Louis cut him off. "Joe, that little girl is dying. I'm going to meet her, and you're going to make it happen. Nothing else matters right now." Within minutes, security guards were escorting Margaret and James as James carried Emily through the backstage corridors. Emily was barely conscious now, exhausted from the excitement and fever, but when they entered Louis' dressing room and she saw him sitting there, still in his performance clothes, his trumpet on the table beside him, her eyes opened wide. "Hey there, Emily," Louis said softly, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. "Your mama tells me you like my music." Emily nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Louis reached out and gently took her small hand in his large one. "You know what, sweetheart? Music is magic. It travels through the air and into our hearts and makes everything a little bit brighter, even on the darkest days. You've been brave, Emily, braver than most grown men I know, and brave people deserve something special." He picked up his trumpet, right there in his dressing room, with no stage, no microphone, no audience except one dying 9-year-old girl and her devastated parents. Louis Armstrong played "What a Wonderful World." He played it slowly, tenderly, like a lullaby. And he sang it just for Emily, his gravelly voice filling that small room with so much emotion that Margaret and James both broke down crying. When he finished, Emily whispered, "That was beautiful, Mr. Armstrong. Thank you." Louis wiped his own tears. "Call me Louis, honey. We're friends now." Then he made a decision that would become one of the defining moments of his career. "Emily, would you like to come back on stage with me? Help me finish the concert." Emily's parents immediately protested. "Mr. Armstrong, she's too weak. She can barely sit up." But Emily, summoning strength from somewhere deep inside, said, "Yes, please, yes." Louis stood up, looked at James, and said, "Sir, I promise I'll take care of her. This little girl came here to hear me sing, and by God, she's going to hear every note up close." When Louis Armstrong walked back onto that stage carrying 9-year-old Emily Carter in his arms, the entire Airy Crown Theater erupted. But it wasn't the usual screaming and cheering. It was something different. It was emotional applause, the kind that comes from witnessing something sacred. 12,000 people stood and clapped, not wildly, but with deep respect, with reverence, with tears streaming down their faces. Louis sat down at his piano bench with Emily on his lap. She was so small and fragile, wrapped in her coat and pink scarf, that she looked like she might disappear. Louis adjusted the microphone and spoke to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my friend Emily. Emily is 9 years old, and she's been fighting a battle that would break most of us, but Emily is strong, Emily is brave, and Emily loves music. So tonight, Emily and I are going to sing together. This next song is for every child who's ever had to be braver than they should have to be." He began playing When You're Smiling again, slowly, gently, and Emily, despite her weakness, despite her pain, despite everything, began singing along. Her voice was soft, barely audible, but Louis's microphone picked it up. And 12,000 people heard a dying 9-year-old girl singing about smiling, about the whole world smiling with you, about finding joy even in darkness. The audience didn't scream. They didn't cheer. They sang along quietly, respectfully, turning that concert into something closer to a prayer than a performance. It was the most unusual, most moving moment in the Airy Crown Theater's history. When the song ended, Louis held Emily close and whispered something in her ear that only she could hear. Emily smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in months. Louis carried Emily back to her parents in the front row. He gave her his white handkerchief, the one he'd used on stage that night. "You keep this, Emily, and whenever you need to remember that the world is wonderful, you hold this and think of tonight." Emily clutched that handkerchief like it was the most precious thing in the world, because for her it was. Louis finished the concert, but everyone there knew they'd witnessed something extraordinary. After the show, instead of rushing to his hotel as scheduled, Louis spent 2 more hours with Emily and her family in his dressing room. They talked about music, about New Orleans, about life. Louis told Emily stories about growing up poor, about learning trumpet in reform school, about all the times he'd wanted to give up but didn't. "You don't give up, Emily," he told her. "You keep fighting. You keep smiling, because every moment of life is a gift." This story wasn't broadcast on television that night. The network cameras were there recording the concert for later broadcast, but when the director saw what was happening, when he saw Louis stop the show and bring Emily on stage, he made a decision. He stopped the cameras. Years later, in a rare interview, he explained, "We were all crying. The entire camera crew, the sound engineers, everyone. We couldn't work through our tears. And more than that, what we were witnessing felt too personal, too sacred to broadcast. That moment belonged to Emily and Louis and everyone in that theater, not to television viewers eating dinner, so we turned off the cameras and just watched." Medical science couldn't explain what happened next. Emily Carter, who'd been given days or weeks to live, didn't die that November, or that December, or that winter. She lived for 6 more months, 6 months that her doctors called highly unusual and medically improbable. Her cancer didn't disappear, but something in Emily changed after that night. She stopped being afraid. She stopped fighting the inevitable and started embracing each day as a gift. Margaret Carter later said, "After that concert, Emily was different. She was still sick, yes. She was still in pain. But she had peace. She'd tell me, 'Mama, I met Louis Armstrong. I sang with him on stage. 12,000 people heard me sing. I did something wonderful.' And knowing she'd done something wonderful, something most people never get to do, gave her strength we didn't know she had." Emily finally passed away on May 3rd, 1964, in her mother's arms at home. She was holding Louis's white handkerchief. Her last words were, "Tell Mr. Armstrong I'm smiling." When Louis heard about Emily's death, he was on tour in Europe. He canceled that night's performance, something he almost never did. He sat in his hotel room and cried. His band members had never seen him like that. "That little girl reminded me why I make music," Louis told them. "Not for money, not for fame, but to touch people's hearts. Emily's heart was pure, and she reminded me that mine needs to stay pure too." Louis Armstrong was never quite the same after meeting Emily Carter. People close to him noticed changes. He became more patient with fans. He spent more time visiting children's hospitals, often unannounced and without publicity. He started a quiet tradition of inviting seriously ill children to his concerts, arranging special meetings backstage. It became his personal mission, though he rarely spoke about it publicly. In 1968, when Louis recorded "What a Wonderful World," many people close to him believed Emily had inspired him. The song's gentle optimism, its insistence that beauty exists even in a troubled world, reflected the lesson Emily had taught him, that even in the face of death, even in the depths of suffering, moments of pure joy are possible. Life is wonderful, not because it's perfect, but because we choose to see its wonder. The Emily Carter story remained largely unknown for decades. Margaret and James Carter were private people who'd never sought publicity for their daughter's suffering. Louis didn't exploit the story for public relations purposes. It only came to wider attention in the early 2000s when a music historian researching Louis Armstrong's 1963 tour discovered Margaret Carter's letters in an archive and tracked down surviving family members. Today, Emily's story is remembered as one of the most powerful examples of music's healing capacity. Not healing in the medical sense, but healing of the spirit. Emily didn't survive her cancer, but she survived long enough to experience pure joy, to accomplish something remarkable, to know that she mattered. And that mattered more than the extra months she gained. It gave meaning to her suffering. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's kindness completely changed everything? We'd love to hear about it in the comments. What made Louis Armstrong stop that concert? What made him bring Emily on stage when it broke every rule of professional performance? The answer lies in understanding who Louis really was beneath the famous smile. Louis Armstrong grew up in crushing poverty in New Orleans. His father abandoned the family when Louis was an infant. His mother was a prostitute who struggled with alcoholism. Louis was essentially raised in the streets, scavenging for food, sleeping wherever he could find shelter. At 11 years old, he was sent to the colored waifs' home for boys after firing a gun in celebration on New Year's Eve. It was there, in what was essentially a reform school, that Louis first learned to play trumpet. Every success Louis achieved in life, he achieved by fighting poverty, fighting racism, fighting a music industry that didn't want to pay black musicians fairly, fighting critics who dismissed jazz as primitive noise, fighting the constant physical toll of performing, the exhaustion, the injuries to his lips from playing trumpet for hours every night. Louis knew what it meant to struggle. He knew what it meant to fight battles that seemed unwinnable. And when he looked at Emily Carter that night, he saw himself. A fighter, a survivor, someone brave enough to keep going even when the world said it was impossible. Louis also knew what it meant to find salvation through music. Trumpet had saved his life. It had given him purpose, identity, a way out of poverty and obscurity. It had transformed him from a poor black kid in New Orleans whom nobody cared about into Ambassador Satch, beloved by millions worldwide. Music had been his miracle, and when Margaret Carter screamed that music had been Emily's lifeline through her illness, Louis understood immediately. He understood that for Emily, his songs weren't just entertainment. They were survival tools. They were hope in sound form. And someone who'd been saved by music had an obligation to pass that salvation forward. There was also something deeper. Louis Armstrong was dying too. Not as quickly as Emily, but dying nonetheless. His heart was failing. His doctors had warned him repeatedly. Every concert could be his last, and Louis knew it. Maybe that knowledge made him see himself in Emily's situation. Two people facing mortality, trying to squeeze every drop of beauty and meaning from their remaining time. Two fighters, refusing to surrender until the final note had been played. When Louis brought Emily on stage that night, he wasn't just being kind. He was recognizing a fellow warrior. He was honoring someone who understood what he understood, that life isn't measured in years, but in moments of transcendent beauty. And he was creating one such moment for Emily, for himself, for everyone in that theater. A moment where love and music and human connection proved stronger than death. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you the hidden stories that remind us why music matters. Emily Carter never knew that her story would eventually inspire thousands of people. She died believing she was just a lucky little girl who got to meet her hero, but her legacy extended far beyond that one November night. After Emily's story became public in the 2000s, children's hospitals around America began programs encouraging young patients to connect with their musical heroes. The Emily Carter Foundation, established by her younger brother in 2005, has arranged meetings between critically ill children and their favorite musicians. Continuing the work Louis began that night in Chicago. To date, over 5,000 children have experienced their own Emily moment, meeting the artists whose music helped them through the darkest times. Musicians themselves started speaking about the Emily story as a reminder of why they perform. In interviews, artists from every genre have cited Emily Carter as inspiration for their own charitable work with sick children. They talk about how easy it is to get lost in fame, money, ego battles, and petty industry conflicts. And then they remember a 9-year-old girl who just wanted to hear Louis Armstrong sing, and they remember what actually matters. But perhaps Emily's greatest legacy is simpler than foundations or charitable programs. It's the reminder that every person we encounter is fighting battles we know nothing about. That woman screaming in the fourth row wasn't a crazy fan seeking attention. She was a mother watching her child die. That little girl wrapped in blankets wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was someone for whom music meant the difference between despair and hope. Emily taught everyone in that theater and everyone who's heard her story since to look closer, to care deeper, to recognize that small acts of compassion can mean everything to someone who's suffering. What's a moment when someone's kindness made all the difference in your life? Share your story below. Your words might inspire someone who needs hope today. Louis continued performing until just weeks before his death in 1971. He never fully recovered from his heart condition, but he never stopped playing either. Music was his life force. Without it, he had no reason to wake up in the morning. And throughout those final years, Emily's memory traveled with him. Close friends and band members reported that Louis kept a photograph of Emily in his trumpet case. It had been taken by a newspaper photographer that November night, showing Louis on stage with Emily on his lap, both of them smiling, captured in a moment of pure joy. Whenever Louis felt tired, whenever his heart troubled him, whenever he questioned whether performing was still worth the physical agony, he looked at that photograph, and he remembered why he played. Not for critics or record sales or fame, but for moments like that, for connection, for love, for Emily. In 1970, just a year before his death, Louis gave one of his final interviews. The journalist asked him what he considered his greatest achievement. Most people expected Louis to mention his revolutionary Hot 5 recordings, or his Hollywood films, or his tours that brought jazz to the world. Instead, Louis talked about Emily. "My greatest achievement?" he said, making a dying little girl smile, giving her one perfect night that mattered more than anything else I ever did. The journalist was surprised and pushed for a more conventional answer. Louis shook his head. "You don't understand," he said. "Success isn't about how many records you sell. It's about how many hearts you touch. I touched Emily's heart, and she touched mine. That's real success. That's what I want to be remembered for." When Louis Armstrong died on July 6, 1971, among the thousands of condolence letters sent to his widow Lucille, one stood out. It was from Margaret Carter. She wrote, "Louis gave my daughter 6 more months of life and a lifetime of joy compressed into one perfect evening. He showed us that kindness isn't just a nice gesture. It's a force that can alter reality. Emily lived longer than medically possible because Louis made her want to live. He gave her a reason to fight. Thank you for sharing him with the world. And please know that Emily was waiting for him in heaven, ready to sing 'When You're Smiling' one more time." That November 1963 broadcast was supposed to be a routine concert recording for national television. Instead, it became the concert nobody saw but everybody remembered. The network director's decision to stop filming meant no visual record exists of Louis bringing Emily on stage. No footage captured that sacred moment when 12,000 people sang softly together for a dying child. History lost the images but preserved the story, passed down through the people who were there, who witnessed it, who carried it in their hearts. Some television historians have called it the greatest moment never broadcast. Others argue the director made the right choice, that some moments are too personal for mass consumption. Either way, the absence of footage has made Emily's story more powerful, not less. Without video to define it, the story lives in imagination, in emotion, in the part of memory where the most meaningful experiences reside. In 2019, the Ari Crown Theater installed a small plaque in the fourth row center section where Emily Carter sat that November night. It reads simply, Emily Carter, November 19th, 1963. Music gave her hope. Louis Armstrong gave her joy. She taught us all what courage looks like. Every year on that date, people leave flowers at that seat, often with notes attached. For Emily, you inspired me to keep fighting. Thank you for showing us that life is wonderful. Louis Armstrong once said, music is life itself. For Emily Carter, those words were literally true. Music sustained her through the unbearable. And one legendary musician's kindness gave her a beautiful ending to a tragically short story. In a world that often feels cold and indifferent, Emily and Louis remind us that compassion can break through any darkness, that taking time to care, really care about another person's suffering can create miracles. Not always medical miracles, but spiritual ones. The miracle of knowing you matter. The miracle of experiencing joy in the midst of pain. The miracle of a moment so perfect it can sustain you through anything. November 19th, 1963 was just another Tuesday for most of the world, but for Emily Carter, it was everything. And for Louis Armstrong, it was the night he remembered why he was really on that stage. Not to entertain, but to heal. Not to perform, but to connect. Not to be Satchmo the legend, but to be Louis, the human being who understood suffering and chose to ease it however he could. That night, Louis Armstrong didn't just stop a concert, he stopped time. He created a pocket of beauty in a universe that often feels cruel. He gave a dying child the gift of mattering, of being seen, of being loved by 12,000 strangers and one famous trumpet player who could have chosen convenience, but chose compassion instead. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when bodies give out, a 9-year-old girl in a pink scarf is still smiling, still holding a white handkerchief, still remembering the night she sang with Louis Armstrong, still knowing that for one perfect evening, the world really was wonderful. If this story moved you, honor Emily's memory by subscribing to our channel and sharing this video with someone who needs to remember that kindness changes lives. Leave a comment telling us, what would be your Emily moment? If you could meet one artist who helped you through dark times, who would it be? Your answer might inspire someone else's hope. Because that's what Emily and Louis taught us. Hope isn't foolish. Beauty isn't frivolous. And taking time to care about one person, really care, creates ripples that last forever. 12,000 people left the Ari Crown Theater that night, changed. They carried Emily's story with them. They passed it to their children. Those children passed it to theirs. And now, 60 years later, Emily Carter's courage and Louis Armstrong's compassion continue inspiring people who never met them, reminding us all that in a world that desperately needs more kindness, we each have the power to stop our own concerts, to notice who's struggling, to create moments of beauty that transcend pain. That's the real legacy of November 19th, 1963, not just what Louis did for Emily, but what Emily and Louis together did for all of us. They showed us what love looks like in action, what heroism looks like without weapons, what greatness looks like when it bends down to hold a child's hand, and what it means to truly see another human being and say, you matter, your pain matters, and I'm going to do something about it right now. Louis Armstrong stopped a concert, but really a 9-year-old girl stopped the world, and for one perfect evening in a theater in Chicago, humanity got it exactly right.